welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 2, Episode 26. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. I'm going bold. I'm not going to contradict myself. I'm not going to turn. Like any one of these two-faced, dim-witted politicians, I'm going to stand by my prediction that Deshaun Watson has played his last down of football. Another update from Instagram and another comment from me. Aaron Rodgers reveals that he actually sat with Mother Ayahuasca and he attributes that experience to his MVP, his back-to-back MVP seasons in 2020 and 2021. And if you were looking for me to admit that I was wrong, well, episode 11 recap of the final season of Better Call Saul. Once again, thank you all for listening. Please do the likes, subscribes, please review the podcast. Send it to all your friends, family, relatives, co-workers. Demand that they listen for fear of compromising the integrity of your relationship with them. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please support the channel. Let's get this underway.
Act 1. I stand by my prediction. Deshaun Watson has played his last down of football.
I was fully prepared to come on to this episode of the podcast, this segment of the podcast, and say, once again, I am wrong. Deshaun Watson is going to play football and may play football in the year of our Lord, 2022. I am not ready to say that, nor am I willing to admit that I am wrong and that Deshaun Watson has potentially played his last down of football. Hear me out, dear listener. People are throwing a tantrum over the arbitrator, Sue Robinson, handing down a 6-game suspension to Deshaun Watson for this off-the-field conduct. And I want to just briefly touch on how few of us understand how labor relations work because so few of us are involved in a union. I thought about a number of directions to go for this piece, and I could actually go on for 20 or 30 minutes about unions. But corporate America, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they've done an excellent job at convincing us that unions are bad, that union membership is bad, and that we're much better off in a free, libertarian-style work environment capable of leveraging our talents and our skills and our wisdom to better and more lucrative positions. What that has really translated into is a number of right-to-work states where an employer can fire you for any reason at any time. That's what we're used to. Granted, there are state and federal remedies for being fired without cause or being fired for discriminatory reasons, but generally, those are uphill battles. When you are part of a union and you have union representation and you have a union contract, you being fired, but more specific to the Deshaun Watson case, you being reprimanded is actually in a completely different realm, and it has to do with how the contract states these things are going to be handled. And specifically, you are generally disciplined according to the discipline that has been levied for the same or similar offenses by other union members. This is why there's been such a tantrum about the 6 games that was levied by the arbitrator, and it is a lack of understanding of how unions work. And what's so comical about it is that most of the people pissing and moaning about that type of penalty are the types of people that would turn around on their Twitter account or on Instagram and advocate for higher union membership, more union drives, more unionization. They want it, they just don't understand what it means. The league, the commissioner, the NFL, has been the target, if you will, of all of this derision. But think about it. We're talking about a league that has a number of players that are represented in a union. So every time one of these players over the course of the last 20 years has gotten into trouble for off-the-field sexual misconduct, The union comes to that player's assistance, advocates for that player in the disciplinary proceeding, and says, look at all these mitigating circumstances. Look at how you have dealt with alleged, because the Players Association is always going to take the player's side and always going to say that the accusations are simply that. They are allegations. It is alleged that the alleged victims and their alleged claims are either illegitimate or are overblown, overstated, dramatized, and that the player does not warrant a long fine or suspension, that there are going to be economic hardships to this player if they are suspended for a significant period of time. This has actually been quite an effective position for the union to take. As we have seen, many a player has gone out and taken PEDs, steroids, done other types of drugs, and been suspended for half a season, for an entire season. Players have gone out and gambled, been suspended for an entire season. Players go out and smack a woman, sexually harass a woman, 3 games, 6 games. Sometimes there is a fine in excess of the suspension, but the union has done its job. The union, the Players Association, has successfully advocated for their members, and the fines and the suspensions for sexual misconduct, for alleged domestic violence, hasn't been that hefty. So although this arbitrator is looking at the scope of the evidence, thinks Deshaun Watson is guilty, she has to look at the same or similar offenses that have been committed by other players and the penalty, the fine that was levied against those players in the past. And generally, it's been a 6-game suspension. Now, I'm surprised that she didn't fine Deshaun Watson at all, but it's generally a 6-game suspension for the most egregious conduct. And again, by egregious, I mean the most egregious allegations of domestic violence or sexual misconduct. Not taking steroids, not smoking marijuana or snorting cocaine, not gambling. Ray Rice knocked his fiancée out and got a 6-game suspension. A lot of people forget exactly what happened in that scenario. It was the Ravens that said, look, you're done, after the video came out. And then no other team would pick Ray Rice up. If you look at the record, Ray Rice was levied a 6-game suspension by the National Football League. That's it. So that is the precedent. Having said all this, putting this situation into that perspective, how can I sit here then and say I'm standing by my prognostication that Deshaun Watson may never play another down of NFL football? The NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, I believe, understands he has a massive public relations problem here. That all of these, at worst, minor, and at best, intermediate suspensions have been inadequate. Goodell has to set a new precedent. He needs to be able to point to a case where he says this is no longer going to be tolerated in the manner that it has been tolerated in the past. And I can levy an extremely hefty fine on the next player that is accused of sexual misconduct or sexual assault. I can levy an extremely hefty suspension for the next player that is accused of sexual assault, domestic violence. The NFL is still trying to play nice with Deshaun Watson, but it has, and I mean to use the word but, I'm using that word intentionally, but it has extreme leverage over this situation. Roger Goodell does not have to abide by the arbitrator's decision. He has the ultimate authority to levy the fine that he wants in this situation. It is actually written into the union contract. The commissioner will be the final arbiter of all suspensions. So why do I say the NFL is playing nice? Because I understand that they've made Deshaun Watson an offer. I believe he's going to be suspended for 12 games and face a hefty fine, as well as other, I think, behavioral requirements. I think he has to go to counseling. And I think they may have made another offer. Maybe that was their only offer. Or better said, I think that was their last best offer. That Deshaun Watson would face a 12-game suspension, a hefty fine, and have to go to counseling. Watson and his defense team handled the negotiation with the National Football League like he handled the negotiation with the accusers throughout the course of the lawsuits, the civil lawsuits that he faced. And it was clumsy, it was stupid, it was short-sighted, and it ultimately cost him significantly more money. To put that in perspective, Deshaun Watson at one point could have settled the lawsuits for peanuts, but his attorney would not sign a settlement agreement that did not allow not confidentiality, but disclosure. What Deshaun Watson's attorney wanted in the agreements was that the settlement could be made public and Deshaun Watson could parade around the amount of money that he paid these women as a testament to the fact that it was a nominal amount, that the claims were bullshit, and he did it just to get back to playing football. Understand, let me repeat, he could have just settled these claims for peanuts, had confidentiality agreements in each one, and this would have all been gone a year ago. Watson could have then settled 20 of the cases for $100,000 apiece, and because he could not settle all of them at once, refused to settle the 20. Now, I'm not sure if you understand how negotiations work, dear listener, but if I offer you to settle a case for $100,000 and you say, no, I'm not going to do it because everybody else that's making a claim against me has to settle as well, and then you come back a month later and say, I'm interested in settling this case. You think I'm going to settle it for $100,000? You had $100,000 a month ago. Now you're coming to the table. I'm going to up the offer. I'm going to demand you pay me more. And Watson, signing deals with these 20 women with confidentiality provisions, very likely paid more. And you know what? We'll never know, because he finally wised up, paid them, and made it confidential. Dumb, clumsy, short-sighted. The guy could have been completely done with this entire situation. And under those circumstances, very likely only facing a 6-game suspension because it would have been quiet. It never would have risen. The volume on this would not have gotten so high if he had settled these claims a year ago while he was still a Texan, and this had just all gone away. Here he is again with his same stupid strategy, sticking to 6 or 8 games being suspended. Understand, Goodell now has the leverage where he can, as he asked for, as the league asked for in the arbitration, he can suspend Deshaun Watson indefinitely. He can suspend him for the rest of the year, and then Deshaun Watson will have to come back in the 2023 season and apply for reinstatement, having shown contrition, that he's taken counseling, that he's done, I'm sure, a litany of other things that the league is going to be able to ask of him, make him jump through a bunch of hoops to make it a public spectacle that they're now taking allegations of sexual misconduct and sexual violence seriously. Deshaun Watson is the test case. He is now the litmus test for the National Football League in the 21st century. Roger Goodell has to make an example of this guy. Because Watson and his team are so stupid and short-sighted and dense and simple, they're going to fight and fight and fight, and they make irreparably damage the relationship that Watson has not only with the league, but potentially with the Cleveland Browns. If Watson is suspended indefinitely, and he will be if he keeps going down this road, it's going to be held up in federal court. People I hear are pissing and moaning that, oh, you'll see, he filed a lawsuit and there. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me with that? Tom Brady, the golden boy, the icon of the NFL, its poster child, filed a federal lawsuit in the Deflategate scandal in an attempt to reduce the amount of his suspension and fine, and he lost. If the golden boy Tommy Brady doesn't have a chance to overturn the way that fines and suspensions are levied against players based on their union contract, Deshaun Watson doesn't have a chance in hell. If in the circumstance of Deshaun Watson being suspended indefinitely, having to reapply in 2023, and having to do so under the auspice of contrition, given the way he's handled everything up until this point, do you think that he's actually going to be able to get reinstated? He may have a come-to-Jesus moment in December of 2022 when he realizes that A, things aren't going to change, and B, the 2023 season is right around the corner. He may actually have some kind of epiphany and start trying to work his way back into good graces. Is that going to be enough for him to play in 2023? Deshaun Watson does not strike me as an innocent man that just continues to fight because he knows he's right and in the long run he will be vindicated. Deshaun Watson seems to me to be someone like Donald Trump who does not have people with his best interests in his ear, and he's being fed things that he wants to hear, that his ego is dying to hear, and that may pay dividends in the short term, but are going to cost him dearly in the long run. Not only have the events of this past week not convinced me that I am wrong about my speculation, my prediction, my prognostication, that Deshaun Watson may never play another down of NFL football, it's reinforced it.
Act 2, the Instagram experiment.
Last week I threw a tantrum over the change in the format, the platform that is Instagram. Turns out that I was one of a select number of people that were arbitrarily chosen to experiment, if you will, with a new Instagram platform, one which was designed to compete with TikTok. As an admitted, as a proud old, I did not get it, and I did not want to try to use it. I didn't want to try to learn it. I was done with Instagram. That change in the platform, in its interface, was so poorly received that Instagram has already gone back and reinstituted or reverted to, for those users that were subjects of the experiment, to the original platform. I am only commenting on this to note, as many others have, as I have already alluded to in other podcast segments, there is an ever-growing community, namely of people involved in the programming industry, in the tech industry, the tech sector, noting that the instant gratification, the way that these social media apps trigger us to continue to click, to scroll, to like, content is irrelevant. The content is actually irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether or not the content inspires you to do great things, inspires love, confidence, joy, happiness, or if it inspires you to do terrible things, if it inspires in you separation, fear, anger, doubt, sorrow. As long as we meat puppets continue to interact on the social medias, the content is irrelevant. It's actually all geared towards our interface for the sake of advertisers. This is how long we can keep these dupes on the platform. This is how much content we can push. This is how many ads you can place within that content, so that in order to get to the next thing, the person has to see your ad. This is how much money that advertising is worth to you. So how much are you willing, dear advertiser, to pay for that placement? Instagram, fearing that they're losing out to TikTok, the number of people who are on platform, who are actually clicking on things at any given time, tried to compete using the same type of interface, because they don't care about you, the end user, dear meat puppet. They care about how long you actually spend on platform. Those numbers matter to their true client, to their true customer, the advertiser. It took a while for these social media gurus, such as Mark Zuckerberg, to figure out how to monetize the platform. That's why they ended up selling your data to bridge the gap between figuring out how to monetize these platforms, given all of the free money that was being injected into their companies. Because at that point, again, 15, even 10 years ago, they didn't know how to make money off of this. Now they do. Keep you on platform. The content's irrelevant. Get the advertisers the data that they need to support shit tons of money for ads placed in between that content. What's truly brilliant about the business model, and it took them years to figure it out. Again, the social media apps weren't making any money. They didn't know how to make money. It took them years to figure this out. They only needed you and I to stay on platform. That's it. They didn't have to create any content in order to keep us interested. We, the users, actually are the content creators. And we're not even the customers. The advertisers are the customers. We enter this forum. We share every bit of our personal information. We get nothing in return except for social proof, and the platform itself, as well as its partner, its client, its customer advertisers, reap all the benefits, make all the money. As a fledgling content creator, as someone who's trying to distribute the content via these mediums, I feel no different than some woman walking off the set of a pornographic film with ejaculate all over her face. It's completely undignified. It's degrading. And what's so funny about that analogy is how accurate it is. A woman who's a fledgling content creator in the adult industry, no one has any idea whether or not her content is actually going to take off. The monetary exchange is actually very low because everyone's taking a risk. If the people choose that content creator, all of a sudden her content becomes more in demand. She's actually more valuable. She's worth more money. But is the mechanism by which she's becoming more popular thereby noble, dignified? I mean, the chimp and the organ grinder may actually warrant dollars instead of pennies or nickels or dimes when it's standing on the street corner. And by way of the hall, you say, that's legitimate. There's a lot of money being made there. Is the money worth your dignity when you have to put on the organ grinder's costume and get out there with the monkey and dance? Particularly where your costume and your dance isn't truly what's driving your monetary value. It's whether or not you can get enough people following your content and will continue to follow your content that they'll stay on platform long enough for that actual social media app to sell ads to be pushed to users in between the content that they're witnessing, that they're watching. This is just a long way of me saying I'm the guy who bites the hand that feeds him.
Act 3. Aaron Rodgers credits Mother Ayahuasca with MVP seasons. I still have hate.
As a divorcee of the Detroit Lions, one of the people that I truly detested as a pro football fan, as someone who actually thought that the team that they rooted for could enjoy some measure of success over the course of 15 years, did not like one Aaron Rodgers. I want to say that after everything that I've been through in my spiritual journey, particularly going to Costa Rica, sitting with Mother Ayahuasca, that I have much more love for all of the people, not only in my life, but in the periphery of my life, in the periphery of the known universe. One can experience an ego death. One can become more enlightened. But as I have discussed, and again, I use the word but intentionally, as I have discussed, the ego does not simply die in this plane of existence, in this heavy, dense reality we call Earth. And enlightenment is not a destination. It is a journey. You are constantly on the journey of enlightenment. You can never know it all. You are constantly learning. Aaron Rodgers did an interview, and I saw this via a link to TMZ, that he had actually sat with Mother Ayahuasca in, I believe, 2019 or 2020, and he had back-to-back MVP seasons in 2020 and 2021, and spoke very eloquently and very sincerely about the experience and how it helped him to be not a better athlete, but a better person, a better teammate, someone who could better experience compassion and love. As someone who has gone through that experience himself, I completely understand this. As someone who is trying to become a more compassionate and empathetic human being, I actually appreciate very much what Aaron Rodgers was willing to admit, because I had my own trepidations about admitting my participation in an ayahuasca ceremony on a podcast that no one listens to. That someone as so high profile as Aaron Rodgers would go on a podcast and not only admit to sitting with Mother Ayahuasca, but talking deeply about the experience. That's very brave. But as a divorcee of the Detroit Lions, and one that still has an ego kicking around, thinking back to that smug asshole throwing 60-yard Hail Mary bombs at the end of games to beat the Detroit Lions, that guy still thinks Aaron Rodgers is a douche.
Act 4, Episode 11 recap of the final season of Better Call Saul.
Whatever shortcomings I had about Episode 10 of Better Call Saul, Episode 11 delivered, and then some. I'm only going to focus on 3 takeaways from the show. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, and I really could talk about it for an entire hour. But there's 3 main things that I want to talk about. The first being the Kim plotline and the way that it's played out. The second being the Saul plotline and how that was actually constructed. All of those flash forwards leading you to believe that Saul was going to live this mundane, boring life in Omaha, Nebraska as this Gene character, when in fact he had a plan all along. It was only a matter of time in his mind before his current ruse could be discarded. And finally, a reflection on the overall Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad universe, and how key a figure this Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman character is to the entire universe. Episode 11 of Better Call Saul puts together some pieces that weren't necessary. They didn't necessarily have to be told for a storyline or a plot line in the Breaking Bad universe to make sense. But it makes sense that Saul is a key or instrumental figure in the rise of Walter White to become the Heisenberg figure that he became. So let's start with Kim. And yes, once again, I am wrong. That's probably going to be the segment title here. I'm certainly now down with the idea that the title of this episode will be, Once Again, I Am Wrong. Once again, I am wrong that Kim is not part of the Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill universe in Breaking Bad. In that universe, in reality, the reality that is that universe, I'll express myself here clearly, eventually. In that reality, Kim has left, she's gone. And there are no tearful reunions. There's no plea for help. She's gone, and she's gone for good. The hard turn is certainly made from Jimmy McGill to the Saul Goodman character. At least with what we've been given to this point in the show, there is no input from Kim. And I think no scene illustrates that better than when Saul goes to that payphone out in the middle of nowhere, probably knowing where Kim has been for years. Perhaps he's reached out to her in the past, though the sense that I got was that he had not. that he had probably paid some other private investigator to find out where she was and just never had the courage, the gumption to reach out to her. We only have 2 episodes left, and I have to say that I am somewhat disappointed that the Kim exit was so abrupt, that there's been so little exposition about what happened to Kim and what she was going through after they broke up. And although there's still 2 episodes, I'm not sure there's that much time to go into detail about what happened to her, though as clever as Vince Gilligan and the writers are, perhaps one segment of one of the final episodes will illustrate everything, and I'll get that nice bow that I want wrapped on that part of the story. I am curious, and I have to believe that we're going to get the back and forth between Saul and Kim when he's on the phone in Omaha in what can only be regarded as a heated conversation turned argument turned tirade. My speculation, given what happens after he hangs up the phone, and hang up the phone being a colloquialism, after he smashes the phone into the receiver in frustration, I believe in the separation that Kim and Jimmy agreed that Kim should take a lot of the money that they had up until that point. And understand, this being, I believe, the Sandpiper settlement is looming. It's very possible that Jimmy said, look, given everything that you've done, I want you to have some of that money. And so Kim has money. She may be in Florida working in some nondescript place, in some nondescript occupation, but she has money. Although it'd be nice to think that Jimmy just got nostalgic in that moment and wanted to talk to Kim, wanted some consolation. It makes more sense within the plot line of the story that he goes out and starts committing crimes again, that he is actually calling Kim to see if she won't give him some money so that he can fulfill the plan that he had set forth the day he went into hiding, assumed the identity of some Gene character managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, Nebraska. It was only a matter of time before he was going to try to get his money back and to make his way somewhere. That leads me into the second thing that I wanted to discuss in this segment, and that's the Saul Goodman plot to lay low, bide his time, wait for the heat to go down, particularly after the death of Walter White, particularly after the disappearance of Jesse Pinkman, and then go and try to collect some of the money that he had stashed, whether that be in physical locations, whether that be in shell companies. The monster that was Saul Goodman was only going to lie dormant for so long. This Gene character could live in a sparsely furnished apartment, could not enjoy any of the luxuries that the Saul Goodman character had enjoyed simply because he was biding his time. Clearly, that had always been the plan, because he had planted that money out in the middle of nowhere prior to contacting and giving himself over to the vacuum repair cleaner who was going to escort him to parts unknown to begin living a new life. He had all of that orchestrated prior to going in with nothing in hand, and assuming this new identity. Small nit to pick, I would have liked to have seen them come up with a way that Saul actually cued Francesca to go to that payphone. They clearly had to have had that worked out prior to Saul disappearing. What was the cue that she was supposed to go out to that phone, knowing the risk that she'd be taking doing so, knowing that she could be arrested simply by going out to that phone? Obviously, she knew that by going out there, she was going to be rewarded monetarily. What was the cue, though, that he was to give her in some future time, under some future circumstance, that she was going to then know, I can go out there, there's going to be some reward, and I'll be done with him. Nitpicked. As clever as Saul thought he was, the feds got all of his money. So the plan, the biding his time, the nondescript job in a nondescript town, in a sparsely furnished one-bedroom apartment, all for naught. Whatever his ultimate plan is, it's going to take money, and now he doesn't have any. In my mind, my interpretation of the scene where he calls Kim, he reaches out to Kim as a lifeline for some of that money in order to fulfill his plan. She says, hell no, I'm not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Again, I was completely wrong about that. And he has to resort to his old ways. And resort he does. Another small nit to pick, another small hole in the plot of the episode, the fence. There really isn't any explanation as to how Saul and his two contemporaries, who, by all means are willing, but certainly they aren't criminal masterminds, and certainly they don't have what you would believe to be a number of criminal contacts in the community, how they find a fence that they can trust so quickly to pawn off all of the stolen information from these wealthy, aging bachelors. Saul's desperation to get the last Mark's information, the one that has cancer, leads me to believe that there's a number of people that he's thinking in his head is the threshold for the amount of money that he's going to need to make his getaway, to complete his final plan on living the life that he wants to lead under another assumed identity somewhere else. It certainly doesn't take a Nostradamus to figure out what happens next, given that at the end of the episode, the preview for the next episode simply shows a police car with two officers stepping out and walking slowly toward what appears to be, by way of sound, a car. Those sounds can be deceiving. I am somewhat curious about the relationship between Saul, Jeffy, and Marion, played by Carol Burnett, by the way. The ruckus at the end of the episode where Saul goes over and berates the two for not being able to pull off the job with the final mark, and the Marion character overhears this, looks outside, and sees what's going on. It may very well be that it's the Marion character that gets the police involved. Does Saul somehow still get away with money? Does Saul end up going to jail for the rest of his life? Does Saul take his own life, or is he otherwise killed? I don't have to ponder for long because there's only 2 episodes left. And speaking of what's left, the brilliant flashbacks to the Breaking Bad universe where Saul, A, is kidnapped by Walt and Jesse, B, has Mike go out and find out who those two actually are, and C, then approaches Walter White. The first of those, Walt and Jesse kidnapping the Saul Goodman character, kidnapping Jimmy, and then the escapades that occur thereafter. Great nostalgia, brought me back to the Breaking Bad universe. The subtle humor that existed in particularly the first, but in the second season, before it became much more mature and much more dark, there were all these lighthearted moments between Walt and Jesse, and many of the other characters in the universe were drawn into that. What I'm going to focus on, though, is the 2 subsequent scenes. The scene where Mike comes in with the information about Walt and Jesse, and the scene where you see Saul actually arrive at the high school and approach what he believes to be a diamond in the rough in the drug business. If you put all of those pieces together, you realize the extent to which the entire Heisenberg mythos, if that's what you want to call it, exists because Saul Goodman saw in Walter White this possibility. No, it wasn't lost on me, the irony that in the scene where Mike comes in, to provide Jimmy the updates on the number of different matters that he had him investigating, that Jimmy is lying on the floor with that foot massager that moves not only your feet but your hips. And there was that flash forward scene in Omaha where you could tell Jimmy embracing that Saul persona, being done with Gene, goes out, starts to splurge, gets himself one of the foot massage machines again, begins to drink again, begins to satisfy his more base desires again, clearly losing control of this Gene persona. Mike has a plethora of information to convey, the least important in his mind of which is, this is who this Walter White guy is, this is who this Jesse Pinkman guy is. They are a couple of small-time nobodies that don't warrant your concern. Saul's thinking bigger. Saul sees the bigger picture. A high-quality product that has a huge demand, and if it just had a little bit of strategy, some direction, experienced, if not wise management, that would be his white whale. That would be the thing that would allow him to make the kind of money that he always dreamed of, and he would be able to do whatever he wanted. He would have built from nothing the equivalent of a Lalo Salamanca. And if you recall the scene where Saul actually approaches Walter White in the high school, there's a great line, and the corollary being that to The Godfather, Walter White saying, "I'm no Don Corleone," and Saul quipping back, "Yeah, you're Fredo. But with the right consigliere, you too could build an empire." As a huge fan of both programs, it dawned on me as I was preparing to do this piece what a turning point in the television show that was. At that point, Walter White was still in the mindset of making this money in order to leave to his family because he was dying. He did not see himself as a criminal mastermind. He did not see himself as some sort of drug kingpin. It was not only that he wanted to be discreet, but he thought of himself as someone who was a good person having to do something bad because he was the victim of bad circumstance. It was in that fateful meeting with Saul in the high school that a seed was planted. Within the storyline, the universe of Breaking Bad, that a seed was planted and began to blossom about the possibilities, the potential that he had based on the product. Simply the demand for the product. We saw that evolution through the eyes of Walter White, and looking at it from that perspective, saw the turn in Walter White. What we did not see was that that turn was facilitated. It wasn't natural. There was a prime mover. There was an impetus. There was a spark. That was Saul Goodman. I love the way the episode put those puzzle pieces together so well and told a familiar story from a different perspective, from a different set of eyes. Harken back, if you will, dear listener, to all of the moments where Saul was regretting his relationship with Walter White, with Jesse Pinkman, and reflect on then his asking Mike to investigate who they were, his approaching Walter White in the high school. Be careful what you wish for. You might just get it. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.